Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to the Southern Maryland groups of the Sierra Club Human Rights Amendment Forum tonight. We're really thrilled to bring this conversation to you tonight with a wonderful panel. I'm Teresa. I'll be your moderator for the night. I am with the Executive Committee for the Sierra Club of the Maryland, for the Maryland State chapter. And again, I will be hosting. And of course, if you have questions, concerns, put that information in the chat box and we'll address that throughout the night. And I'd like to start with letting Nina introduce herself tonight. Nina.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you everyone for being here. I am Nina Beth Carden, the director of the Maryland Campaign for Environmental Human Rights. I live in Baltimore County.
All right, all right. Let's go to Luca.
Hey, yeah, my name is Luca Griffo-Hahn. I'm calling in from Montgomery County, and I'm the coordinator of the Maryland Environmental Human Rights Amendment student campaign. So really excited to be here.
Welcome, Luca. All right, Randy, you're up next.
Sure, I'm Randy Lyon. I'm legislative chair for the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. And I'm thrilled to be here with my co-panelists who I've been working really closely with over the past several weeks to really advance this amendment and get it enacted.
We're excited. Stacy.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Stacy Hartwell. I am the Environmental and Climate Justice Chair for the NAACP Maryland State Conference. And on behalf of my conference president, Mr. Willie Flowers, our executive committee, and our membership, I'd like to thank the Maryland Sierra Club for inviting us to this august panel this evening.
All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So I want to give a few shout outs. I got St. Mary's County on the line. We got Montgomery County, Shruti Bagdar from the Sierra Club. We have the town of Eagle Harbor. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Miss Vontasha Sims, Rosa Hans, who is the chair for the Maryland Sierra Club chapter. We have Laurel from Anne Arundel County. So we are proud to be discussing this tonight. So I'm excited about this conversation. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to jump right into this and start chatting. So I'd like to start with letting Nina open up the conversation by talking about what is the Environmental Human Rights Amendment.
All right, thank you so much. Everyone is born with a fundamental right to a healthful environment. Everyone. Doesn't make a difference what generation you're in, what zip code you're in, what wealth, what situation. Everyone is born into this world with that birthright. And sadly, not everyone enjoys that right to a healthful environment. So what the amendment is designed to do is to put into the Declaration of Rights of Maryland State Constitution a statement that says that everyone has a right to a healthful environment. The Declaration of Rights of our state constitution is the Bill of Rights of our state constitution. And in it, we put not just laws, but we put in the fundamental values that underpin all that we believe in and all that we do in this state. So putting this in the Declaration of Rights says, this is what we believe as a people, this is what we believe as a state, this is what we believe is a right for everybody. What's interesting is that back in 1973, in that heyday of environmental activism, when the federal government was being very environmentally active, and many of the states wanted to also be very environmentally active, 6 states put into their state constitutions some provisions that said that everyone had a right to a healthful environment. Maryland.
Only 6.
I would say as many as 6.
Okay, not a lot, but okay.
Actually, to be very frank, we were 5 in 1970s and 1 in 1980s. Okay, but there for about 50 years now, there have been 6 states that have this in there. Other states like Maryland decided to go a different route, not putting it in the Constitution, but putting it in a policy act. So Maryland in 1973 created the Maryland Environmental Policy Act, which said each person has a fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment. So for almost 50 years, Maryland state law has asserted that we all have this right, not just to a healthy environment, but a healthful environment. That was their word. Why? Because even back then, Maryland General Assembly understood that the way that the environment goes is the way that society goes, the way that public health goes, the way that we go. You cannot have a healthful society if you don't have a healthful environment, right? Our health, economic health, civil health, All that depends on healthful environment. So they said that in 1973, that we all have this fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment, and it has to be pursued at the highest level with the highest priority throughout the state.
So we
that didn't
started the
happen.
process. So we
It-
started the process.
We started the process, but it kind of ended right there too. I mean, the Policy Act didn't have any enforcement teeth, and it sort of fell by the wayside. It is hardly remembered these days, hardly invoked these days. So what we determined was that we could take this right that has been our right in the books for 48 years and put it in the Constitution. So the amendment says two things. One, as a matter of human dignity, everyone has a fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment. And that the state, this is the enforcement part, the state is the trustee of the natural resources of the state on behalf of all of us, current and future generations. So that when we look at the environment, we don't just look at a short-term time horizon, but we understand that what we do today to the environment is going to affect our children, our children's children, and our children's children's children. So that's what we put in there. State is trustee of the natural resources of the state for our benefit and the benefit of our children, our children's children, and future generations.
I like that. I like that. So tell me, and does anybody else want to jump in and start swinging at that question? Or I can really we can just try to dig a little deeper and just talk about what we're actually attempting to do here. How do we get there? What are we attempting to do? Randy, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. One of the things that I think is most important about this amendment is that it does establish the right to a clean and healthful and sustainable environment as a fundamental right. And I go back to the Bill of Rights types of freedoms, which we all learn about as children in elementary or junior high school. And we carry those with us as fundamental pieces of what we are as Americans, and it shapes our thinking. We wouldn't think to challenge people's freedom of speech or freedom of religion or freedom of assembly. Those are all basics that we start with. And I think that it's useful to elevate the idea of a sustainable environment to that pretty limited sets of rights that we put up there at a very high level. And for example, over the last 50 years since we've had the Maryland Environmental Policy Act, we've had lots of environmental laws, and for sure they've done a lot of good. There are a lot of things that are no longer legal, but at the same time, we have new levels of environmental threats that we didn't realize decades ago. So, yes, we're better off on some measures, and we're actually in a more critical position in terms of others. People are just, human society is just so powerful now that our margin for error, if we overshoot, we warm things up too much, it's not easy to back that down. And so I think building in the idea of sustainability and environmental rights as a fundamental right is world shaking. I think it shapes the way we think of ourselves. And I think it'd be great for Maryland to do this, partly to demonstrate to other states and to try to advance this at the national level. I think over the last, the previous 4 years, we would have seen that having something like this at the federal level would have been a big advantage when all kinds of environmental provisions were loosened, whether it's protection of native lands or air quality. So, it won't have quite as far-reaching effects if it's just limited to our state, but I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's really responsible. And so I think it's a great thing. And I'm thrilled to see the traction that this has had, within our colleagues in the environmental movement and even more broadly. So it's been really encouraging.
Okay, that's great. So it sounds like we have laws, or at least we've made some type of executive decisions, almost 50 years ago, Nina pointed out, to really kind of protect the environment and our right to a healthy environment, but we haven't really done enough, so to speak. So I really want to understand, or I want our listening audience to understand, why is this really important right now? And if you guys can really help us to understand that. I mean, and again, I think I shared this with you guys in our pre-meeting. I'm learning the same way that you guys are tonight, or the way our guests are. So I'm learning a lot about this, and this is a very important topic. So please tell us why this thing is important. Luca and Stacy, I want you guys to jump in on that. Come on, Stacy.
Okay, thank you so much. You know, at the NAACP, we approach our advocacy for this very important legislation from a point of equity. Unfortunately, race is the #1 indicator of where toxic waste and pollution facilities are located. As a result, pollution and other environmental hazards are concentrated in Baltimore City, Prince George's County. We've got major issues in, Calvert County on the Eastern Shore. And, in the Baltimore, Washington area, this region has the nation's second worst ozone problem. This pollution is a result of power plants, vehicle emissions, cumulative impacts, and the worst ills required to maintain a society compounded one on top of another, are located where people of color live, where BIPOC communities live. And many low wealth communities and many communities of color are concentrated around these type of facilities. The evidence of damage caused by pollution or emissions, contamination from runoff. I think we got Eagle Harbor in the house tonight. It's clear, in Baltimore City, the area most affected by toxic air pollution, mostly from roadway vehicle emissions, also has the highest asthma hospitalization rates in the state. The city's lung cancer rate is 25% above the US rate. Baltimore City has among the highest rates of death in the country related to poor air quality. So, we even launched a campaign related to air quality to address this issue. And I could really go on with other things that are impacting us in Prince George's County. Like we were rated an F by the American Lung Association. So when you ask about my story, and I think we discovered when we had one of our very first panels about, Calvert County, which is the epicenter, they have one of the highest rates of breast cancer in the country. And all of this stuff is related to cumulative impacts that this legislation can address. And one thing that I must quote, and I'm gonna share this and then we can pass the floor over to Luca, is that, and this is a quote from my soror and sister in the Links Incorporated, Madam Vice President Kamala Harris: "We cannot achieve health justice, economic justice, racial justice, educational justice without environmental justice." And this is the legislation that is the common thread around being able to achieve environmental justice for our constituents and our membership.
That's good, because I was actually reading somewhere that even when you control for economic factors like wealth, right? People who are even in higher incomes, even race is still the greatest indicator of whether or not you are being exposed to disproportionate amounts of pollution and disproportionately affected by environmental issues. So we know that Prince George's County and Maryland State in general, we have a lot of minorities in the state, but we do pretty well in this state, and yet we're still being disproportionately affected by these issues. So come on, jump in, Luca.
Yeah. So again, my name is Luca, and I really appreciate what my previous two statements of my colleagues. I think it's one of the sort of foundational, I guess, things that makes this so important is just how far-reaching this amendment can be. And I think, so my role in all this is to, as the coordinator for the student campaign, is to sort of amplify and organize the voice of the youth, which is going to have, this amendment would have a tremendous impact on. And I think the thing that distinguishes this amendment from MEPA, which is what we've had this far, is the permanence of it, right? When we think of our amendments, these are things that are guaranteed in perpetuity. And I think going forward, as we face new challenges and sort of the great unknowns of climate change, having an amendment in place that is there regardless of what official is in power or what the sentiment of the time is, having this to, I guess, combat future grievances and degradations is going to be really foundational. And I think we can look to Pennsylvania, which we were just talking about, sort of as an example of this, where when this was passed, there was no real common knowledge of fracking, right? People weren't really aware of what that was or how that was going to affect people. But recently, sort of after that, I mean, as fracking became a thing in a monumental case called, it was Robinson Township versus the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they actually were able to bring suit against these companies and protect their municipalities from the harms of fracking, despite fracking not being a thing when this amendment was initially passed. And so I think going forward, as things appear and as things sort of come into place that might be harmful and dangerous, that the youth are going to have to sort of handle, right, over the course of their lives as climate change becomes more intensified and the fallout becomes more and more real and prevalent. Having an amendment like this is going to be really just foundational to protecting people, Marylanders.
Teresa, can I add on to that fabulous statement? So two things. One, Luca and I were speaking to several high schoolers yesterday. And one of the things that they said to us was that they had a campaign, I think it was last year, but they're trying to maybe bring it forward this year, on environmental health, speaking to the older generation. And their motto was, "We are not disposable." Children, these children think that the older generation, never mind what they say, but the way they act, is treating them as if they are a disposable generation. And that is just a devastating thing to think about. There are studies that I have been reading that show that the younger generation feel betrayed. Besides the anxiety and the stress and the uncertainty and the hopelessness, these are the words that they use. They also say they have been betrayed. They feel betrayed by us and by legislators. And they point the fingers at legislators saying, you don't care for us, because if you do care for us, you would not be treating us and the environment this way. So it is just heartbreaking to hear that their hopelessness is coupled with a sense that we have made them disposable. So when they speak about this amendment, why they are interested in this amendment, they say because this gives them hope. This restores their hope, both in the older generation caring for them, and the hope that there will be this foundational shift that allows us all to work together to create a healthful environment so that they can have a healthful future.
Wow.
Definitely. Yeah. And I will just say, I think that is one of the huge central goals of the student campaign, is to really give younger folks throughout Maryland a way to come together and organize and show that they are listening, that they are paying attention, and that this matters to them. So yeah, definitely.
With that being said, I feel responsible. When you talk about how our young people are, they feel like we've let them down. I feel responsible for this. I feel that every adult has a reasonable expectation to get involved in this conversation to protect the future of our young people, people who are coming behind us. And I like what Luca said. He pointed out, he says, irrespective of who's in office, having this amendment in place really puts into action some level of protection for our environment and for future generations. So we know that, I mean, and not to be super political about it, but not everybody has a consciousness of what environmental issues are, how they're impacting the general public and the welfare of the public. And it's critical that irrespective of who has the responsibility of us leading as the executive of this state, that they have a responsibility to adhere to the Constitution of this state. So I think that was it's a very key thing that you pointed out, Luca, and I appreciate you saying that. So I want to shift a little bit and just talk a little bit more about human and environmental rights, right? So tell me a little bit about who will be affected by this constitutional change. Any one of you want to jump in on that, Lena, please?
Everyone.
Wow.
Everyone. One, to start the legislature, the Environmental Human Rights Amendment will help guide the legislature in its determinations and deliberations about environmental laws. Right now, there is no gold standard that the legislature has guiding them, right? There's no what I call a tractor beam pulling them toward a certain understanding of what the laws that they are passing should be aspiring to and should be measured against. If you have an environmental human rights amendment, the laws that are being introduced into the legislature will be seen against the Environmental Human Rights Amendment, you say, well, does this law, or how does this law better implement, better comply with, better comport with the Environmental Human Rights Amendment? So there's a gold standard that is now set before the legislature and set before the governor. It will also give people the hope that should their rights be somehow compromised, that there are avenues that they can pursue to assure that government lives up to the standard that the Constitution provides for them. And so everyone eventually should be able to benefit. Although I think Stacy is absolutely right. There are certain areas that need the Environmental or Human Rights Amendment more than others, because they have been strategically, disproportionately affected, not accidentally, but strategically. And we need to then also strategically respond to that degradation and make sure that we heal it and the people who are there.
Wow. So this could somehow give some visibility to some of those communities. Stacey, if you want to jump in and talk about the related impacts for environmental justice and those more vulnerable communities, like how we could really potentially help by using this type of legislation or constitutional amendment, if you will.
Well, you know what, the way we see this amendment, it's kind of like the best way to assure environmental justice, both to like promote laws and regulations that protect and enforce it, and as a backdrop to defend against these offenses when government falls short. I got to give a shout out, though. This is really important because we got to recognize our champions. Juanica Fisher, District 47B, she is a champion for this legislation. Delegate Eric L. Barron, District 24, a champion. Vaughn Stewart, District 19, Montgomery County, and Senator Edith Patterson. We need to really uplift these people because, election time is coming up, everybody. And we really want to really support the people who are advocating for legislation that protects our community. You know what? I'm going to talk a little bit more later when we talk about things people can do, about actions we can take toward legislators who are afraid to inject accountability to the conversation with their donors, or who are more beholden to corporations than to the people who elect them. So we might touch on that a little bit later, but I did want to uplift the people who are advocating and doing this really important work.
We need legislative champions. Go ahead.
I'm thrilled that Stacy actually mentioned the names, because I think we're doing wonderful ESP between us. Because I was going to say, when you look at the sponsors of this amendment, they look like Maryland. It's an incredibly diverse group from all over the state, all racial backgrounds, all economic backgrounds. And it's not every piece of legislation that has that kind of breadth. I certainly think the environmental justice aspects of it are really important. And this amendment has traction that goes well beyond what you might typically think of as kind of a narrow green set of constituents. It's very broad-based. And as we look to build support for the amendment, we're also looking at very broad organizations, very broad-based organizations, for example, like the NAACP, which has a whole realm of issues that it's concerned about, or the Maryland Public Health Association. So these are really good signs that we have folks that care about people across the state that also care about this amendment.
Luca, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I'll just say similarly on the student level, I mean, the colleges and universities and high schools that I'm working with in this initiative are, we have large public universities, small private liberal arts colleges, rural schools, HBCUs, community colleges. It's sort of this whole spectrum of people who are interested, involved, and passionate in bringing this to their communities and their educational institutions, which is really awesome to see. Because I guess in the end, I mean, this is something that is going to affect so many things and so many parts of our lives. And, it's not going to magically make environmental degradation go away overnight, but it's going to do so much to help so many different forms of environmental degradation and environmental harm that it's really an amazing piece of legislation.
Before we go on, I want to give a shout out, to Delegate Edith Patterson for joining us tonight. So glad to see you here. She's a Charles County delegate. So welcome, Delegate Patterson. And she also put a note in here. She says the members of the Maryland General Assembly were just rated on their environmental voting record. So I'm not I'm not sure who she's referencing, but I know that the LCV, the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, just issued their rating for our Maryland General Assembly persons. So yes, we're excited. She also says, please note that the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland has had environmental justice as a priority for the past 5 years and cites action items to support the position. Oh, we are fantastic. That is fantastic. We're delighted to hear that, Delegate Patterson. So yes, she's referring to LCV. So we're excited to hear that. One question I want to ask before we go any further, why is now the right time for this? Why is this the right time?
You know, well, I used to be involved in tree planting and orchard planting, and the statement there was the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is now. So the best time for us to have passed this was 50 years ago, you know, but the next best thing is right now. We can't wait any longer. And I think there's a zeitgeist abroad. The United Nations Human Rights Council just this month, passed a resolution saying that environmental health is a fundamental human right. When we started working on environmental human rights amendment here in Maryland 4 years ago, there were 2 states that were promoting it. It was us in Vermont. New York State just passed its environmental rights amendment. It sort of got in the game after us and leapfrogged over us, which is not so good. We don't want to be bested by New York. Now there are 14 other states promoting the environmental human rights amendment. People are realizing, I think because of COVID, that if we don't take care of the environment, we will not have a healthy society. I think they understand COVID also disproportionately affects people of color, and that those people who are in those communities that have environmental degradation are more susceptible to COVID's effects, and that's an environmental injustice. I think people are realizing with climate change, I mean, just over the past 2 years, there's been an explosion in an awareness that climate change is here. It's not tomorrow, it's not next year. So I think there's a greater awareness that we cannot keep doing the same things that we've been doing and get out of this mess. And we cannot continue to be incremental about the change, that we have to move at the pace of science and nature. And I think that there's an understanding we have to have a sea change of awareness and legal foundations to make sure that we can get the change done at the rate that it needs to get done.
That's critical. We can't ignore the science. Come on, Randy.
Yeah, I was going to say, and there's another kind of procedural reason why this year is very important, and that's because it's a major election year in Maryland. And once the General Assembly hopefully passes this amendment with a 60% vote, so it needs a very strong vote to emerge from the General Assembly, but then it goes onto the ballot. And so it's important. This is a good time to be doing it because it'll be, you know, an important issue in terms of turnout and you know, wide participation. So even number year makes a lot of sense.
Oh, to our communities, tell a friend to tell a friend about this amendment. Go ahead, Stacey.
You know, when you talk about timing, I'm reminded of a quote that I heard. It was by Emma Watson during her 2014 He for She campaign. She said, "If not me, who? And if not now, when?" And as we see, the problems with the environment are escalating. Things aren't going to get better, so we need to really act now. And as you know, Nina shared with us, we should have done this like years ago. But you know, if not now, when? And another thing I want to add to some of the statistics that Nina was sharing around who is behind this kind of legislation from a global perspective. I mean, we are very far behind because over 100 constitutions across the world have adopted a human right to a healthy environment, often serving as a powerful tool to protect the natural world. Over 100 constitutions. And where are we in the United States? You know what? We have sold, the greatness of America to the world. But now, especially since George Floyd, they have seen what America is really about and has exposed the underbelly of this country. So quite frankly, if we do not begin to do this kind of work, the world is already, we heard from COP26 about how the world sees us as a bad actor in this, and that we've caused a lot of the problems around this world, yet we're not willing to do the work to fix them. So this is really like another pillar to us being able to right some of the wrongs that we've put forth, you know, across a number of human rights issues. So, you know, it's just time for us to belly up and get ourselves together. And the one thing that I can't stand is I can't stand being behind New York.
I like it.
And New York has already passed this thing. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. No, we got more juice than what New York has. We can bring this.
I like it.
So,
I like it. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this broader, right? So this is not just an issue of environmental rights or environmental justice, right? This is really about equity and justice for all, right? Let's talk about equity and justice, right? How this really kind of shapes that notion in our country, or in our state specifically, and in the country. And Stacey actually alluded to it about exposing George Floyd and all kinds of other bad things that things that we're not being good stewards of in our country or in our state. Let's talk about that. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Well, I'll simply start by saying that this amendment is beginning to be used precisely for that purpose. The governor of Pennsylvania, just this past month, knowing that he has a legislature that's not quite as progressive as he is, shall we say, said that he is creating an executive order which will establish an Office of Environmental Justice in the executive department, of Pennsylvania. And he listed the several things that the Office of Environmental Justice must do. And in his statement, he specifically said the reason that he's doing this, the primary reason and the primary authority that he has for doing this is the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania. So that we can in fact use this amendment to promote environmental justice, because that's precisely one of the things that we need to do. Is, as we keep saying, there is inequity. The people who create the environmental degradation are often the people who suffer least from it. And the people who least contribute to environmental degradation are often the ones who suffer most from it. And that, if nothing else, is a clear definition of injustice.
Luca, did you want to add something to that, or?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you say equity and justice for all, I think, like we know that there are disproportionate impacts of environmental degradation on communities of color and low-income communities. And I think by all means, a really foundational part of this is going to be to address some of those rights, or some of those wrongs, excuse me. But I think also sort of as sort of the coordinator for youth in all of this, equity and justice for all also pertains to those future generations. So those generations that maybe are here that cannot vote, and maybe the ones that are unborn but will face the worst impacts of climate change. So I think sort of circling back to that idea of what an amendment does versus a regulation or a law, this really truly benefits equality and justice for all, in that it guarantees this in perpetuity. And so allowing those protections to those future generations that might not have a voice now or might not feel empowered right now. So, yeah.
I think that's a really important point, Luca. Right now, this common property resource we have of the environment tends to benefit folks who grab it first, and they can be polluters, and they pollute it, and then it becomes the obligation of the victims to clean it up. Obviously, people who are low income, they don't have the resources to pay for that. And certainly the future generations aren't well represented in that. And so to clarify that, no, this isn't a jump ball. It's not whoever gets to it first gets it, but that the basic foundational principle is, no, this has to be protected and be sustainable. And then we can work from there in terms of how we develop.
Yeah, I like that. I think that oftentimes we think about environmental issues as their problem, or the problem of the state, but we're all breathing the same air, right? So even in Baltimore, where we have disproportionate amounts of people who are of color that are being affected by environmental issues, Baltimore still has white communities as well. And their children have respiratory issues and asthma and being exposed to this very same air, right? I've been gracious enough to be able to live in a pretty green place like Charles County, but not everybody has that privilege. Not everybody has the privilege to be surrounded by a bunch of trees who are constantly filtering our air. So I see this as something major and something really broad that we can do, not just to support people who can't really speak for themselves, but just about every person that, even the people who are not necessarily environmental advocates, they don't realize how we're environmentalists. That's what I'll call us tonight. We're really human rights advocates as well. This is a matter of social justice, right?
Oh, amen. Yes, there is a fellow, Liberty Hyde Bailey, who was like one of my gurus 100 years ago, worked in the Teddy Roosevelt administration, reminding America as they were flooding into the cities, how in fact we have to still stay close to the land, because the land is sort of our mother. The land is where we come from, and the land is what's going to protect us. And one of the things that he said in this book called The Holy Earth, published in about 1915 or so, is that one does not know how to take care of, he used the word our fellow, each other, unless we know how to take care of the earth. That is, we forget that that we cannot love each other, right? We cannot love each other as we want them, to love us. We cannot be there for each other if we don't take care of the earth. To pollute the earth is to harm the other. And that is just equitable all across the board. So in order to love each other, love your neighbor as yourself, in order to love each other, in order to be good to each other, we have to be good to the earth. We don't know how to take care of our fellow if we don't know how to take care of the earth. And so people who do not think of themselves as environmentalists, but think of themselves as people who love each other, you have to be an environmentalist too. Can't love each other if you don't know how to take care of the earth.
Well, actually, to build on what Nina's just said, and I mentioned some of the cross-cutting groups that are interested in this, there's a huge participation from the faith community in doing this, and that's partly Nina had done some outstanding outreach there. So again, that's I think that's a real demonstration of what Nina's just said, that this resonates with people that have a conscience.
And how do you elevate the conscience of a man other than talking about love, right? And balancing power and general welfare. And I think someone posted a quote about this constitutional amendment, and I'd just like to read it just to be a little bit more specific. It says, a constitutional right, as opposed to a regular law, would ensure that environmental protection is considered amongst the highest obligations of the government, pursued as a matter of highest public priority, and not merely good public policy, right? So we're talking about being stewards and our brothers and sisters keeper, right? And doing good for the common good, right? Just not being good public policy persons and politicians and doing the jobs that we're assigned, but really encompassing all of the virtues and values that can help save all of us, right? Nina, did you want to?
Yeah, that phrase, as a matter of the highest public priority, that is found in the Maryland Environmental Policy Act of 1973, where the state said each person has a fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment, and that needs to be pursued as a matter of the highest public priority. We have not done that for 48 years. It is now the time, as Stacy says, if not now, when? Now is the time for us to pursue that right as the highest priority.
Go, Luca.
Yeah, well, I think another aspect of sort of the lines that you guys were just talking about is it shifts it from sort of a reactive mindset to a preventative mindset, which is just huge in terms of, because I mean, yeah, okay, like it's great if we can, cure something like cancer, but what if we could remove the environmental degradation before it even happens that leads to that cancer? And so I think that's a really important part of this legislation and sort of promoting this and upgrading it from just MEPA to amendment.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, so let's talk about what other states are doing. Talk about competition. So we heard about Pennsylvania and New York. So are there other states that are like getting involved in this conversation and really talking about this type of amendment?
So there are 14 other states. Hawaii, interestingly enough, Hawaii was one of the 5 states in the 1970s that put in their constitution an environmental rights provision. Hawaii is back at the trough now. They're back at the table now. They're saying they want to put an environmental human rights amendment in their Bill of Rights. so that it is self-executing, that it doesn't need legislature in order to enact it, that it will be just like all the other rights. So Hawaii is coming back for a second, dip and saying, we want to put it in our Declaration of Rights. 13 other states are doing this. Delaware is in the game. New Mexico, I've talked to somebody in New Mexico. They think they might pass it this session. By the way, New Mexico has a 30-day session, so we shouldn't be so complaining about a 90-day session. But then it's New Mexico, they're all laid back. But they're thinking that they might pass it, which means they might pass it during our 2020 session. So if we have November pass it, or if we had New York pass it November, and we have New Mexico pass it in January, I think that's going to give us an additional boost. Maine is very close to passing it. They call it the Pine Tree Amendment. They're very close to passing it. They might pass it also while we're still in our session. So that could be 3 states. I think I'm feeling Stacy. Okay, we do not want to be number 4 or 5 here. We want to be. We should have been number 1 in the second round, so we at least don't want to be after number 2. West Virginia, for goodness sake, is
West Virginia.
Somebody in, yes, West Virginia. There's several people in West Virginia who are promoting this. So it is just catching fire, and we definitely want to be the next state that passes it.
Okay, so I want to ask Randy to explain this, okay? And because I want to make sure that not only for the people who are watching and listening right now, but to whomever may capture this video later in years to come, if they're wanting to model what we're doing here in the state, anything of that nature. What's the difference between legislation and constitutional amendment? Can we just talk about those 2 different distinctions? Because we pointed out inalienable rights, and then we talk about legislation, right? Randy, let's just make that distinction.
And I'll look to Nina and others to chime in on this as well. But it gets a higher regard from the courts than does legislation, and it sets foundational principles that legislation needs to hew to obey. And something that's sometimes said about the amendment is it will generate a lot of litigation. But the idea is that by having this kind of an amendment in place at the beginning, you avoid laws that cause problems. So it's not like we see a tremendous amount of First Amendment litigation. Yeah, that sometimes happens, or but not all that much. It's not like nobody ever complains about the First Amendment by saying, well, there's some court cases. That's really not on our radar screen when we think about those kinds of freedoms. So I think it will help shape the laws that then follow, and it will shape the way that that state agencies execute their laws, so that they're going to be held to a high standard. That, hey, they need to, are they in fact protecting people's environmental health and a sustainable environment? And if they're ignoring that, then they are at risk that they're going to have to up their game. There's one other thing I wanted to say, though, since you did mention, that in effect there's a broader audience, and that is that those of us on this panel and those of us that are working on this amendment, we're not naive, and we're not trying to sell something and saying it's going to solve all our problems and that all you have to do is like this and it's going to be just so wonderful in Maryland. I wish we could say that, but the reality is, if we look over to Pennsylvania, it's not like they have really a measurably better environment than we do in Maryland. In some ways, it's worse. So this is an important thing to do. It's going to set the foundation for doing the right thing. And we're clear-eyed about the fact that this may have years to have effects. I mean, we're seeing still effects of some, like equal protection is having effects on life in the United States in ways that, probably weren't, apparent to people, decades or even centuries ago when some of those amendments were put into our fundamental documents. So I think it's a really good thing to have. I think it's important to shape the way legislators feel their obligation and the way citizens feel about their obligations to each other and the way they conduct themselves.
I know that even in the United States, when you look at the US Bill of Rights and how it was applied in past years, that it didn't apply to certain people, right? It wasn't fundamentally understood that this applied to everyone, right? It said all, but not many people interpret it as meaning all. right? So I see this as something that really pushes the envelope, and it's taking us years. We're still grappling with the notion of the US Bill of Rights and who has a right to certain liberties and freedoms in this country, and how that looks and works, and who can protest about it, and what those things look like, and how we shape laws that follow. Those things are still happening. This country is still evolving, right? We're an ever evolving country. This is a democracy, and that's the beauty of democracy, right? It's for and by the people. And it becomes resonant when things are changing amongst us and values are changing, that we have the ability to go back and shape our Constitution, our fundamental belief system in this country. And we have that opportunity to do that in Maryland, right? So Stacey, please jump in.
I wanted to comment on something that Randy said earlier, about, this leading to a lot of legal action. And I still maintain that that is a hysterical response, because there's absolutely no evidence of that. So when people say that, or you hear that, please do them a favor and ask them, can you please share your evidence of that? Because that is a narrative, that is a false narrative that is being put forward by certain individuals, who, like I said, are more beholden to their funders and to corporate America than they are to the people. And, we're going to talk about vote, things you can do later, but these are the people that, are supposed to be looking out for us. And all this is an accountability tool. Do you think that we would have ever been able to put in Prince George's County, the state's only sewage sludge incinerator, multiple landfills, asphalt and aggregate industries, as well as 3 huge coal power plants? I mean, would that have been able to happen with this kind of legislation? I think not, because then our permitting office would have been said, well, let's take a look at the impacts of all of this on that community. And we therefore would not have been rated an F by the American Lung Association and, all these other ills that are facing this particular geography. So it's just an accountability tool.
Stacey makes an excellent point. If you actually do the data searches and see where these amendments are being used in cases, it's minuscule numbers. And so their value is in shaping policy at the very beginning. And the follow through on that.
Franklin Curry, who is the original author of the Pennsylvania Environmental Human Rights Amendment, did a study of the first 20 years of that amendment. And the impact that amendment had was primarily on the shaping of law and the sharpening of regulations. And even now, the greatest impact of the amendment seems to be that when regulators return to their regulations, they now look at those regulations in light of the Environmental Human Rights Amendment of Pennsylvania and say, how well are we doing to comply with and enforce the environmental human rights? It is primarily, just as we're saying here, is primarily a guide, sort of a gold standard that pulls the legislation and the regulation toward higher standards. That's primarily the impact of the amendment.
Wonderful. Have we seen any actual benefits or challenges from the passage of this type of amendment in other states?
In Pennsylvania, 7 municipalities, that is townships, that is local governments, 7 local governments used the amendment to protect themselves from fracking. So I know often we think, oh, this is about people against the government. No, in Pennsylvania, government itself, local government itself, used the amendment to make sure that they could stop fracking when they wanted to. In Montana, the amendment has been used to stop mining enterprises from dumping arsenic-laced water, their detritus, into the local river systems. So yes, it has been used in several states to actually have significant impact.
Yeah, and one of the key things in the cases, I believe, and Nina, correct me if I'm wrong, but for example, in Pennsylvania, the problem was the state had prohibited the ability of localities to regulate oil and gas development in their footprint. And we all know that fracking generates groundwater issues. So this wasn't a case of using the amendment to go after individual companies, but rather it was a case of the municipality saying, hey, state, you've got to give us some relief so that we can do our own thing. It was just really leveling the playing field to allow these municipalities to protect their people. And the same thing in Montana, it was that the state was not doing a good enough job regulating arsenic that was being dumped into the rivers, that didn't meet a threshold test of being a plausible way. And again, I think there were other cases in Montana where the state had prohibited, I forget whether it was the Department of Environmental Protection or another entity from too much oversight. And again, that was found to be inconsistent. So this is primarily a matter of governance. It's much less so, if at all. It's not really so much individuals against companies, that type of thing.
So in Montana, it was arsenic discharge, right? So, I mean, very serious things for people to be actually exposed to. So we're talking serious business here. We're not talking like using this amendment to hurt people, but really to help people and empower people before their government, right? Not before institution to other institutions, but really before their government, giving them the ability to go before their government and petition the government and say, look, this is my right. And look at this guy over here. You've approved this project. You've approved this thing or whatever it is, incinerator or whatever it is in my community. And here how it's going to hurt me, my family, and future generations. Luca, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah. Well, earlier I was going to add about, I don't remember the specific court case name, but in one of those instances in Montana, this amendment actually gave youth legal standing to sue for essentially saying, you are giving, these emissions are harmful to us. These emissions are harming our future. And so it actually gave them standing in court. But also what I was going to throw in, just sort of in response to what you guys were just talking about, is this, I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. So suing, I think that's part of the controversy, right? Please go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick. It's basically what I was going to say before is that this is a piece of legislation that isn't going to eliminate development, right? We understand that we need to keep the lights on. We need to build homes, affordable homes, and things of that nature. This is just going to try to control bad actors in development specifically. So it's not one of those things, it's sort of, what they were saying earlier about hysteria and people just kind of go all or nothing and immediately jump to, well, we're going to get so bogged down and there's going to be so much and it's going to make so nothing can happen and we're just going to stagnate. And it's unfortunate to say, as we were talking about, where we're not on the cutting edge of this. Like, this has already happened in other states, so we can kind of look to what's happening there and see that there is development continuing. There is no overwhelming amount of legislation or litigation, but yet this is in very precise tactical locations or uses. This is preventing bad development and bad actors from succeeding and essentially getting away with their crime.
So why is this so controversial? What's all of it? What's all the controversy about, if that's the case?
Okay, I'm going to throw something out there. Corporate greed.
Randy's shaking his head. He's like, yep.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there are folks who are quite happy that the default position is they can pollute and then move to an area where it's clean, and the people who live next to their discharge, they have to bear the problem. But the folks who own the factory they're not living in the shadow of the factory or next to the pipe. So I think that's part of it. I think there have been other folks, and the other folks have at least raised the issue is like, will this amendment do enough? And again, it's kind of the Pennsylvania case. Like, okay, Pennsylvania has it. It's hardly an environmental paradise. We realize that. This amendment is not a panacea, but it's a good step forward. And we see it as a constructive step that sets reasonable ground rules, the kind of cases that people are talking about. Yeah, if you want a world where arsenic is discharged into rivers, doesn't sound like a very good world to me. So that's a very reasonable, threshold standard to say, hey, we're going to use a constitutional protection for environmental health there. If you're looking for the rights of future generations to a sustainable situation, yeah, that's a pretty important issue. And if we just rely on future generations taking people to court or saying that, future generations wanting to be included in a cost benefit analysis when they're really not there to buy and sell, it just doesn't it doesn't make sense. So I think this amendment sets some really good ground rules. And as folks have mentioned, in New York State, it passed with almost 69% of the vote. So
Wow.
it's more than a 2-to-1 ratio. There were other ballot amendments that didn't make it this past year that were also good government types of things. Yet this amendment had really broad appeal. So we think when people understand about it, we think this is really going to resonate with folks. And again, the kind of interest that we're getting from, whether it's the faith-based community or the NAACP, these kind of broad-based groups that have a lot of issues that are on their radar screen, that they go, yeah, this is important and we support it. That's a really good sign.
Nina?
I think that in part it's fear, because we will have to change some of our operating practices. And I think people are afraid of what that might mean. But here's the thing, we're going to have to change our operating practices with or without this amendment. We know that, right? Because if we just keep going where we're going now, we're going off a cliff. And you know what? We're going off a cliff together. It's not going to be just some people going off the cliff. We are all going off that cliff. And we know that prevention is cheaper than reaction. Reaction means we have already done the harm. People have already been made ill or have died, or the degradation of the environment is already so severe that it's beyond repair in anyone's imaginable future. And then we still have to spend all this money fixing things up. Let's get it right now. And I think greed is probably part of the reason, but I think that we can also respect those who are just fearful of what this change might mean, and speak with them and guide the conversation and guide the responses to what the amendment will be able to produce, so that we in fact protect those people who are fearful, and put in places those transitional operating factors so that everybody comes out ahead.
Luca made a note, well, actually he mentioned suing. He used the word suing. So I think it's fair to say that suing really is another way to say petition. So petition our government, right? So the only way that we can bring something before our government or our state, if we believe that our rights have been violated, is we petition the government through litigation. And we go before a court within that state and say, hey, this has happened to me or my community. The persons who are actually representing us, usually our municipalities, officials from our municipalities, would go before our state government and petition the government on these issues, and through the litigation process, if you will, right? So is that some of the hysteria that people are concerned, like, oh, there's going to be a lot of litigation, people are going to be suing left and right? Is that some of the controversial concerns?
I think so. I think, yeah, it comes a lot down to semantics. And I think, when you're saying, okay, this is something that's going to guarantee our environmental rights, and I think people tend to go to that all or none sort of mentality. And so it's like, well, I drive a car. Does that mean that I'm at fault? Like I'm at risk? Is something going to happen? And so, yeah, I think sort of going into what Nina was just saying, it is a fear. And I think our job as sort of activists in this is to try to educate and explain that, yeah, I mean, I think petitioning is a much better way to put this. And sort of it empowers people to have their voices heard. And I guess when you say sue or litigate, I think that brings to mind a lot of panic and paranoia.
I wanted to
and building on what I think it was Stacy who raised it too, or maybe Nina, that there have been very, very few cases involving these amendments. I mean, folks can correct me, but maybe 5 cases in each state over a course of 5 decades. So it's not as though there are hundreds or thousands. It's a handful that are being litigated, and it's not people versus companies. It's people going to the state government saying, you need to give us relief by actually by implementing the laws, or doing a good job of executing the laws that are on the books, because you're violating our constitutional rights by not executing your laws in a thoughtful way. There were regulations about arsenic and that kind of thing, but they weren't being addressed properly. So yeah, I think it's I think it's an easy talking point for people to point to it and say, these things will be decided by the courts. But the reality is they'll be decided by legislatures in terms of crafting laws and that conform with this social expectation that no, you've got to develop your laws in a way that are sustainable and don't disadvantage people and put their environmental health at risk. And we've seen too much of that. So hopefully it will change things, but it'll be, steering a battleship or something. It'll be a gradual change, not I don't think it's a particularly adversarial type of procedure. At least there's no evidence of that from the states where it's been in place so far.
And Delegate Patterson actually put a note in our chat, and she says, the last House floor debates centered around environmental legislation, clean water, septic system regulations. The orchestrated arguments against any type of regulation were very politicized and resulted in the legislation getting stymied. Those who oppose environmental justice should be targeted and lobbied. So she's even calling as a delegate for us to directly lobby those who are in opposition of this. Thanks so much for that, Delegate Patterson. So I wanted to talk now about how we will accomplish this. So I want to start with Nina. Let you jump in.
So as Delegate Patterson said, we need to put political pressure on our legislators. We need to go to, maybe I can put this in the chat, go to our mdehr.org, our organization. We, along with Sierra Club and other organizations, are promoting this as a highest priority. Go to there, look up our petition, sign our petition. We want 10,000 names on this petition when we go to the legislator. That's a lot of names, but we can do it with all of your help. Sign the petition, get your organizations to learn about the amendment, invite us to come and speak to you so that we can then educate you, and you can then go to speak to your legislators, and also invite us to join you if you feel more comfortable going with you to your legislators. We need to let every legislator know about this amendment and that we are behind it. We're all supportive of it. As Randy said, this is going to take 3/5 vote, 60% vote to get this passed. It's not a simple majority. And once it gets passed, there's a two-step process for the amendment to be put in the Constitution. It then goes to you, the voters. So if we get it passed in this session, it'll be on the ballot in fall 2022, and it needs to pass there. It just needs a simple majority. But if we have a 60 or 80% majority passing it, as they did in New York with the 70% almost a majority, that will tell everybody that this is not just now the law of the land. This is the law that people want, and it will encourage the government to use it as energetically as they can. We need you to make, in my words, we need you to make noise. We have to let the legislature know this is a top priority for so many of us, along with other top priorities. I want to say one other thing. The amendment will not it will not work itself. The amendment itself is a tool. The amendment itself is a goal. The amendment itself is a value. But the amendment simply says you have a right. You then have the obligation to utilize that right, to make sure that that right is enforced. So that means, just as Randy said, we get this amendment in the Constitution, and then it is up to us to make sure that the legislature passes laws that implement and interpret that amendment, right? And our regulations implement and interpret that amendment. So we need you across the board to let your legislators know, let the government know that you are behind this, and get involved, get educated, and make noise, and we'll be able to get this done.
Yeah, and following up on what Nina said, we have an organizational sign-on letter that your congregation or your watershed group or your, I don't know, scouts, maybe they're too young, but all kinds of community organizations that we really welcome that. And I actually naively volunteered at one point to help Nina out with that. But then I saw the incredible list she already had, and I don't know, it's at least 80 organizations, and they're of all different types, all across this state, from big ones to very small ones. The beekeepers and folks that may not jump to mind right away as well. We have all different kinds of alliances. That's a way to really be a force multiplier. And then yes, we'll also have a petition that's available on Nina's website. That's for sure, it's up and running right now. Eventually there'll be an identical one up on our Sierra Club, but you're only supposed to sign one. So, if you're listening now and you want to sign on to Nina's, that's wonderful. And eventually we'll want people to maybe do some tabling events, sit outside their local grocery store or outside their metro station. And it's a little bit old fashioned, but we really want to get the word out so that the average folks who may not be looking at the Sierra Club website or looking at our Facebook page hear about this, how good the amendment is. And, they take it back home and talk to their social network and go, gosh, there actually is something here. And again, what Luca's doing with the students, exactly the same thing. It's a real force multiplier for getting the word out. Because this is going to be a really hard push. We really only have, a couple months to accomplish this. By the end of March, it's getting late. So we really have to push hard and raise consciousness about this.
Okay. And Nina, I wanted to give you an opportunity at the moment to talk about the ambassador training, which is a very critical portion of the campaign.
Absolutely. We've trained, I guess, about 40 or so ambassadors. It's an 1.5 to 2 hour training. You then join this group. We teach you about the fundamentals of the amendment, some of the things we talked about here, the history of the amendment around the world, the history of the amendment in the United States, history of the amendment in Maryland, what it can do, what the benefits are, some of the challenges that we hear, how to respond to the challenges, so that you are equipped to talk to your friends, your coworkers, your family, as well as your legislators, to make sure that everybody hears about this and understands truly the power of this and the benefits of this. We do have other ambassador training programs coming up. The next one is December 12th, I believe, but we also will come to you. If you've got a small group that you put together, 5 or more people, we will come to you at your schedule and your convenience, and we do it virtually. So please be in touch with us if you want to be trained. 2-hour training gives you all the information that you need. We have a booklet, we have an active toolkit. We've got all the materials that you need, and thank you for inviting me to say that. We would love to train more people.
Luca, did you want to talk about the student groups and what you guys are doing actually to organize around this?
Yeah, definitely. I think before I go into the specifics, I'll just say, I think this, as sort of Nina and Randy and Stacy were talking about sort of throughout the night, this is an amendment in that it differs from legislation in sort of how it's passed, right? So once it goes through the legislator, instead of going to the governor, it goes to the people, right? So I really want to reiterate just how important showing widespread support just through all avenues for this is, because I guess in a way, our legislators, usually they are there to act as decision makers for us on our behalf and sort of pick and choose what legislation should become a law based on the good of society. In this situation with an amendment, I think something that's really key here is that they're deciding if this should go in front of the people, right? If they should let the people decide. So I guess this might be a little bit divisive to say, but in this situation, they're almost the gatekeepers of democracy, I guess, at a certain level. And so demonstrating that this is something that the people want in front of them on the ballot in 2022 is really important. So just broadly, writing them, signing the petition, just demonstrating that this is something that you care about, and this is something that your friends care about and your colleagues care about, and that you want to decide, right? Even if maybe you're like, well, I don't actually want this, but deciding that you want the right to decide on the ballot, I think is really important. And that's a really foundational aspect of the process here. And so in terms of specifically the student campaign, so I'm coordinating it. We have a number of colleges throughout the state already involved, but we are hoping to expand to ideally every academic institution in the state. So if anyone knows of or has connections to students at even a high school or potentially middle schools or anything that they think would be really involved in this, we've also been working with some sort of educational organizations on this as well. We would really love to get them involved in any way, and I'll drop my email in the chat so that anyone can reach out through that. But yeah, I think the ways that we've been getting involved is we actually just this week, Washington College, their SGA passed a resolution, essentially just saying, as a college, this is something that we want to see happen, which is really great. And so we're working on that in other academic institutions across the state as well. And they're now a really great sort of model that we can apply to other places. And so I know UMD and St. Mary's are working on that as well. And so hopefully we'll expand that to more. In addition to that, we've been rolling out tabling events, which is effectively just, having students sitting at the quad or whatever, passing out literature. We have a QR code that you can scan to sign our petition easily and quickly. And on top of that, following us on social media, I think is going to be really huge. We're hoping to sort of drive this on both analog and digital platforms. And I think we can probably drop social media information in the chat too, both for NAACP, MDHR, and Sierra Club. And then, yeah, I think, I don't know, am I missing anything?
Stacey, why don't you tell me about how the NAACP is actually supporting this campaign and how folks can get involved on the NAACP side if they happen to be members or want to join?
Well, you know what? There's a big myth out there that the NAACP is for Black people and by Black people. That is not true. The NAACP was founded in greater part by white folks. So we want to encourage people to join the NAACP because you know what? It's a powerful brand. But what drives that engine are the people. And we need the voices of people who are not impacted as greatly as the communities who are. So all those NIMBY people like, oh, not my backyard, we need them to join us to help us amplify our voice. The next thing that I want to share with people is that hello, elections are coming up, and we are going to be supporting those candidates who are supporting good governance. So, what, it's a great opportunity, for people to be held accountable with the upcoming election. So I'm going to say the 3 V's, vote, volunteer, and please use your voice. Wow. Share this message with someone, the holidays are coming up, Big Turkey Day. Have one conversation with someone during your celebration of Turkey Day. I don't use the T word, the other T word, because I want to respect our Piscataway, Kanoi Indians, the Native Americans from this land that we get our bounty from. But please share the conversation with someone, use your voice. So the 3 V's, volunteer, vote, use your voice.
Come on, Randy.
I was going to say, also, since presumably there are a lot of Sierra Club members out there right now, definitely feel encouraged to reach out to Luca or myself if you're willing to volunteer to help. We could use people in all different kind of skill sets and time availability, and also energize your Sierra Club groups, your county groups. Like, for example, I'm thinking Montgomery County is going to be really important to this just because where some of the key legislators are. So we want to make sure that, if the Montgomery County group can get out there and, mobilize a dozen people to do some things, that could really be a tremendous thing. Those of you who are members of other, really broad-based groups, whether it's League of Women Voters or AARP or various labor unions, those are all the kinds of places that we're reaching out to show how broadly shared the benefits of this amendment are. And so to the extent that you can, to the extent you have that somebody who's on a board of one of those kind of entities, let them know that, plant the seed that this is really interesting. And if you get a positive, sign from them, let us know and we can get in touch with them with the organizational letter to see if they're willing to sign on or take another kind of role.
All right. Go, Stacey.
I just want to share one little story. I'm going to be celebrating Turkey Day. I live down in National Harbor, but I'm going to be celebrating Turkey Day in Chevy Chase with some friends. And I'm having made for myself a t-shirt that I'm going to be wearing to this event that has the QR code for this campaign on it. And I'm sure everyone there is going to ask me like, oh, what is it? What is it? I'm just going to say, you have to scan the code. I'm also, I had a sticker made for the inside of my car that just has the QR code that I have back so it doesn't obstruct my view, the QR code on my car. And people will just scan it out of curiosity. So I'm using all kinds of ways to get people to see and hear about this legislation.
All right. So I wanted to pose one of the questions that we had from Mr. Mark Imlay. Mark posted a question and he says, do we all have a human right to the health benefits of being in a local forest? Is that a part of part of the human rights? Assuming when we talk about environmental rights and this amendment, will this potentially protect, I'm assuming he means forested lands as well, and the benefits of forested lands on human health?
Yeah, I mean, I think this, I'll take a shot at this, Mark. I think the simple answer is yes, the language in the amendment would protect air, lands, waters, wildlife, and ecosystems. So, so it's very much aware of protecting natural areas as well as, you know, environmental health more generally, which is parks, and means, you know, that kids in urban environments have fair access to parks and healthy, you know, options. Whether there's literally a constitutional right for a forest preserve, you know, within walking distance or something like that I don't know, and I don't think that's really what you intend. But yes, preservation of our natural environment and a sustainable, you know, having a sustainable set of ecosystems in the state is part of it. So yes, I would expect it to be very helpful for conservation purposes. I don't know if Nina or anybody else want to.
Go ahead, Luca.
Yeah, I'll just hop in. I think so. Personally, my background, my undergraduate degree was focusing on wildlife biology. And I'm an avid backpacker and kayaker and rock climber. And so a lot of my personal interest in this comes from that preservation of wild places and the right to natural places, because we know that that is very foundational to human health and success. And so I'll just real quick read the second line of the Environmental Human Rights Amendment. So the first one being, each person as a matter of human dignity has a fundamental inalienable right to a healthful environment. But the second is, the state of Maryland has a duty as trustee to preserve, manage, and enhance the air, land, water, and ecosystems for the benefit and enjoyment of both present and future generations. So I believe sort of within that language, there is definitely a justification to the right to natural places. And also I think an important part of this is an equitable right to that, because we already know that it's very slanted in that regard. So yeah, that's another huge aspect that I'm looking forward to with the implementation of this amendment.
Rosa actually put in the chat box, access to nature is a human right. Yeah. All right.
And just to put one more fine point on that, and both Randy and Luca alluded to this, this is not just for grand forests, you know, out in Garrett County. This is for urban environments as well. Everyone deserves access to open and green, healthy space, which also, by the way, if you bring those to the cities, it will help clean the air, cool the air. Heat is the greatest killer of people of all weather events, which people don't realize. It'll help manage stormwater better. Right? It'll increase economic value. So creating open spaces and green spaces, even in urban environments, is valuable, not just as an environmental human right, but because it helps so many other things as well.
Okay. This has been a great discussion tonight. A really terrific discussion. Luca, you look like you have something else to add. I see.
So I was just going to notice, I think Mark had a follow-up. I'm not sure his hand's up, but I just saw that. I don't know if there's.
And we can't really include our guests, our attendees into the panel discussion tonight because we're in webinar mode. But Mark, if you have another question, I'd love to hear it. You may put it in the Q&A box. It would be nice to see your question and hear your question if you have another. I know that you did submit another question about sending health benefits of forests including the science and who you can send that to. You can always send that directly to your local group, to the local group chair. You are in Southern Maryland, I believe, if you are in Charles County. If you are in Prince George's County, you can go to our website, the Sierra Club chapter, Maryland State chapter's website, and find the chair for that group. Otherwise, you can always contact me. My email, I can put that I can put that actually in the chat box for you if you want to send an email. We also have Rosa Hance on the line, who is the Maryland State chapter chair. She's always open to discussions and learning new things. So you can also have access to her, to sending her an email as well. So, so I wanted to just say thank you to our attendees who's left and to our panelists for a great and hearty discussion tonight. And before we wrap up tonight, I will give you guys the last say for anything you wanted to leave on record tonight. So I'd like to start. I'm going to end with giving Nina the last say. So I'd like to start with Stacy, then we're going to go to Luca, and then Randy, and then we'll have Nina. So please.
I'll tell you what keeps ringing in my head is a saying that I don't know who said it. I have to Google it and find out, but it says, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So we really have to begin to do something differently. So don't be afraid of change and embrace the opportunity that this legislation leaves for us. Thanks.
All right, Luca.
Yeah, I guess there are a lot of closing thoughts that I could throw out there, but I think one of the main reasons why, or sort of inspirations for me getting involved in sort of conservation and environmentalism and things of that nature, was I read a book by a guy named Aldo Leopold called A Sand County Almanac right before I went to college. And he promotes this idea of a land ethic. And I think it essentially just is saying that, you know, a thing is right or good when it promotes or preserves the integrity of the land, right? And I think he says it way more eloquently, and I suggest everyone at least give it a gander. But I don't know, I think this amendment to me is sort of fundamental to both a love for the land, and a love and respect for the land, and a love and respect for common humanity and human dignity. And I think that's really the core of what we're fighting for and hoping for with this amendment passing. And you know, we've discussed how this isn't going to just make the problem go away overnight. And there's a lot to, you know, this will be a tool to help in further battles. But I think, yeah, exactly. Like, this is going to be a really monumental, foundational, transformational to a degree legislation that I'm really excited to see where this ends up.
We're all excited. Please, Randy.
I just wanted to say, you know, thanks again to my co-panelists and, you know, co-conspirators on this thing. It's been so much fun working with you guys. I hope that, you know, our audience can see like how well this team is working together, and the interchange of ideas and the teamwork that's going on. And there are other people behind the scenes that you're not seeing on the screen, but who helps, you know, think of the idea for doing this panel and are putting it on. So there's a really good group of people working on this issue. And I want to encourage folks, those of you who are out there, to join in this. I think you'll find it a very good, you know, fulfilling experience. You're going to be working on something that's really worthwhile, and working with people who are really constructive and positive. And so again, thanks to my teammates here. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope we win.
Go team. All right, Nina, you get the last say tonight. You're on mute, ma'am.
Thank you. First, Teresa, I want to thank you for being a fabulous moderator and keeping the conversation going. You're just wonderful. And thank you, NAACP and the Sierra Club and the co-panelists and the participants who were, you know, watching. That's really quite wonderful. as we said, the health of the land determines the health of society. Health of society determines the health of all of us. In order to love each other, we must take care of the land. It's just that simple. The equation is not difficult. Everything we are, everything we have comes from the land, comes from the environment. If we don't take care of that, we are damaging ourselves, and we are damning the future. And as a mother and as a grandmother, that's really why I got into this. When my children started having children, and I was looking at the future, and I was terrified, because I don't know if they're going to have the kind of world that I was privileged to be born into. I remember snowstorms, where I would be covered with snow, right? And I remember when I could go out in the summertime and not have to worry about, is this a red code red day, or with my children going out without having to worry about them breathing air that would poison them. I could eat snow.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was those days we could go out and get bowls of snow and eat snow. And what are my grandchildren going to experience? Every generation has an intergenerational obligation and covenant to take care of the earth for the next generation, to hand the world on to the next generation with a world of opportunity and growth and promise. We cannot be the generation that violates that covenant. This amendment will help put in our Constitution a commitment to that covenant and assure that all of us live up to that covenant, so that when our children, our children's children, our children's children look back, they will say thank you, instead of God knows what they would say if we don't do it right.
God knows. So thank you so much to my panelists, our guests. This was a great and wonderful night. Thank you so much to the Sierra Club of Southern Maryland. This is a dynamic group of people working on the Southern Maryland group for the Sierra Club. I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm excited to share with you guys and to work alongside some really bright and very motivated people who are geared up for the fight. And to our listening audience, and to whomever will listen to this in the future, please use this information on the screen to reach out to our panelists and to the respective organizations that are involved in this conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to send notes of gratitude and thanks, or questions about how you can get involved, or for additional information. Again, to our guests, good night, and thank you so much.